Welcome back. Well, it wasn't your typical Washington news conference. 7 former U.S. Air Force personnel there to talk about UFOs and a string of incidents dating back to the 60s. Bizarre sightings of objects hovering over U.S. nuclear sites. UFO researcher Robert Hastings organized the event, and here's some of what he had to say.
I believe, these gentlemen believe, that this planet is being visited by beings from another world who, for whatever reason, have taken an interest in the nuclear arms race which began at the end of World War II. Regarding the missile shutdown incidents, my opinion, their opinion, is that whoever are aboard these craft are sending a signal to both Washington and Moscow, among others, that we are playing with fire, that the possession and threatened use of nuclear weapons potentially threatens the human race and the integrity of the planetary environment.
Well, retired Captain Robert Salas is one of those men. He was an intercontinental ballistic missile launch officer, and he was on duty back in 1967 at the Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana when something happened he couldn't explain. He joins me now from Agoura Hills, California. Sir, thank you for coming in tonight. We appreciate this.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Take me back to that day in 1967. There you are down deep below in the earth, and you had a phone call from one of your colleagues. Pick up the story from there.
Yeah, actually I had 2 phone calls. First call, they were talking about lights flying in the sky, doing very strange maneuvers, extremely fast speeds, and no noise. They were sure they weren't aircraft, and I even said, you mean like UFOs? And because I was not a believer in this subject then, and they said, well, sir, we can't explain it. So I more or less dismissed the call. I said, well, call me back if anything more interesting happens. And sure enough, about 5 minutes later, they did call back. This time, the main guard was very frightened. You could tell by his voice he was very scared. He had all the guards out there with all their weapons drawn. And he said, sir, we're looking at a glowing red oval object. It's pulsating, and it's just hovering or sitting right outside the front gate. And he was scared to death, wanted me to tell him what to do next. I think I told him to make sure nothing comes in the perimeter fence. At that point, we disconnected the call, and I went to tell my commander about this, thinking that we possibly could be under some sort of an attack. Again, we were underground. We're obligated to stay down there, so neither of us could go up and take a look at this object. But at that time, when I started telling about the object, our missiles started going into what's called a no-go condition or unlaunchable condition.
And what would it take to put your missiles into an unlaunchable position? Because I imagine that's something you wouldn't have happen normally.
This is very rare. I was a missile launch officer for about 3 years in Montana, and very rarely did any of these missiles become disabled for any reason. Very reliable system. In this case, we had a way of querying the system, and what happened was the guidance and control system package failed. In other words, there was some kind of a signal sent to the guidance and control system that resulted in the shutting down of the missiles.
So clearly you told your story to the authorities and obviously to the U.S. Air Force. I mean, what happened after this? Where did that story go, or did it stay below the ground where you were?
Well, the next morning we were relieved. We were ordered to report to the squadron commander's office, helicoptered back to the base. The squadron commander was white as a sheet, assured us that this was not an Air Force exercise. And in addition, there was a member of the Air Force Office of Special Investigation there in his office. He wanted to make sure we signed non-disclosure agreements about this incident in particular. He said it was classified secret. We were never to talk about it again to anyone, including members of the military, etc. And after that, it was muffled. It was shut down.
So why
we were never to talk about it again.
Why are you talking about it now? You know, a group of you went out to Washington to tell the story. Why are you doing this?
Well, I'm able to do this now through the Freedom of Information Act. I was able to get a similar incident declassified. I thought it was my incident at the time when I did that, so I started speaking publicly. It turns out later I found out it wasn't my incident. There was another incident that had happened a week earlier, and that is well documented. And the reason we're talking about it now is because so many of these ex-military people have come forward, told us these stories, have in some cases have witnesses to back them up and some documents. We have this available to the press. We want the press to look into this with a critical eye. We all signed affidavits affirming the truth of these stories, and we think that the government needs to be open about this.
Well, it's out on the record now, and interested to see where it can go now. I know the U.S. Air Force has said, look, we already have a standard position on this, and we're not going to comment in detail about this particular incident, but you certainly got the conversation started. I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. So, aliens that are curious about nuclear weapon technology. Well, that's allegedly potentially terrifying or fascinating, but then people have been keeping busy, staying scared or fascinated by flying saucers for years.
Years to take over unidentified flying objects.
It seems as long as we've been looking to the skies, we've been spotting unidentified flying objects. Modern UFO spottings began with Roswell in 1947. Witnesses claim the U.S. Army found alien corpses in the wreckage of an alien spaceship that crashed there. But for years, UFO sightings were the staple of kooks, cranks, or conspiracy theorists.
How many trips have you made to outer space?
Well, I'd say 350 or a few more.
When was the last one?
Well, first part of June.
And who did you go with?
Well, people from Jupiter.
However, the movement got a shot of credibility in 1973 when then-Governor Jimmy Carter reported he saw a UFO.
Waiting outside in Leary, Georgia for a meeting of the Lions Club to begin, Mr. Carter observed a sharply outlined, self-luminous object. It appeared from the west, he said, about 30 degrees up.
And when Carter became U.S. president, he ordered NASA to investigate.
In short, if the phenomenon can't be weighed, measured, taken apart, and analyzed, NASA wants nothing to do with it.
Canada is also a charter member of the alien nation. In 1967, witnesses saw something crash into the ocean off Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia. The crash was investigated, and government agencies chalked it up to a UFO.
It's one of the biggest UFO stories in Canada ever.
Of course, crop circles kept cropping up, keeping aliens in the news.
I don't believe in UFOs. Well, I didn't until now. I mean, I don't know.
And just a couple of years ago, the British government declassified decades of reports of UFO sightings, and while many could be explained, others remain a mystery. So is that all it takes to keep people staring at the skies? Well, according to ufology research of Manitoba, in 2008, there were more than 1,000 reports of UFO sightings all across Canada. So why are we so fascinated by the possible existence of life on other planets? Well, Richard Surratt is the host of The Conspiracy Show on AM 740 radio here in Toronto, and he joins me now. You know, there's always the two schools on this. Some people saying, I believe, and other people saying, if you believe, you're nuts. Tell me about when you hear from people about the fascination and whether there is actually a growing population out there that does believe that there's someone out there.
Well, 150 million people since 1947 have reported seeing a UFO mark. So there's a sizable chunk of the population. The latest U.S. polls show about 5 to 10% of Americans, and we could probably draw an equivalency up here in Canada, have seen a UFO. Probably more people have seen a UFO than have seen an unassisted triple play or wolves born in the wild, I would venture. So there's an interest out there because there's a sizable part of the population who knows this is real. Whatever it is, they're seeing something. What they're seeing, you know, it's not a trick of the eye, it's real. What is it? Well, let's all get together as journalists and try and figure it out.
But there always seems to be this wall of skepticism that's out there that prevents this idea, and I can understand with our previous guest who was saying, look, we just want it out there so people can actually talk about it, and yet it always ends up being the punchline to a joke rather than people saying, let's take a hard look at it. I mean, you've looked into this. I mean, how serious has there been investigations into these millions and millions of reported sightings.
Not very. You know, it's interesting the way that the media, I'm part of the media, the way the media handles this. A friend who is probably one of the world's foremost UFO disclosure advocates said to me, imagine a scientist reporting one day that a meteorite the size of Phobos was heading towards the Earth. This is a planet killer. And all the journalists, you know, they follow this judiciously for about 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden they drop it. And we don't hear about it again. That's what's going on with the UFO issue. This has the potential to be the most important story ever. You want to win a Pulitzer Prize, Mark? Write about this, okay? Because one day, when the truth is known, you can say, as a journalist, I took it seriously and I wrote a book about it. It gets that kind of coverage. It's like, you know, they said to Woodward and Bernstein, Bradley said to them, okay, follow this Watergate thing, and then in 2 weeks, I tell you what, drop it. That's what's going on with the UFO story, with the UFO issue.
But so on the one side, though, you have the channel of skepticism. On the other side, though, you have the idea about conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories being that there are some government forces at play here who know the truth and are trying to conceal the truth. I mean, do you subscribe to that?
Yes, I do. We have enough government documents obtained through FOIA, or some of them are not even declassified. They remain classified, but they've been lifted from a desk and faxed to a UFO researcher. We know that the government in the United States, here in Canada, they've taken a keen interest in this. There's the famous Twining memo. This is General Twining, Air Force General. I believe he ended up being an admiral, was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A pretty big wheel. In this famous memo, he talked openly about, to another general, talked about these flying saucers. They're real. They can outmaneuver our most sophisticated aircraft. What are they? What do we do about it? There's a lot of that type of documentation that's available. If anyone were to seriously just take 2 weeks and study this, it's all there. The U.S. government, in particular, has maintained a 63-year truth embargo on this issue, going back to Roswell in 1947. Right. And there are a lot of people working judiciously, dedicating their entire lives just to trying to pressure governments to disclose what they know, to come clean.
Well, I think it's a fascinating discussion, and I think we dismiss it at our own peril when we do this, that I think it's at least worth exploring. There are a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of credible people who are coming forward and really trying to advance this. Interesting to see these gentlemen trying to push their case in the U.S., and we want to see how far that gets. Richard, we'll see. Let's follow this one.
I'll take your word for it.
All right. Great to talk to you. Thank you.
You too.
Well, there's more fodder for the conspiracy theorists out there. Now, a newspaper story surfaced this week claiming the United Nations is poised to appoint an Earth ambassador for extraterrestrials. Now, this woman, Maslin Othman, she's a Malaysian astrophysicist, and she heads up the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, or UNUSA. It's based in Vienna with a staff of 27. That much is true, but according to Othman, the alien ambassador part, yeah, that part's not. UNUSA's mandate is to promote the peaceful use of space science and technology, and any reports that it's now going to be a sort of a first contact are, and I'm paraphrasing, way out there.